Hey there, I want to welcome you to this video. Maybe you attend the Rock Church, or maybe you just found yourself on our website or our social media feed, and I want to just take some time and thank you. We're actually, as a church, we're in this series called Undecided, and we're going through these kind of college classes, little 101s, and we've kind of hit philosophy and biology. Today we're going to talk about history. At church we talked about history 101. Today we're going to flip it to history 201, and to help us do that, I've got Scott Johnson, who serves at our Aner campus as our campus pastor. And Scott, I want us to talk today about history. Now, man, with you I could talk a lot of history. We could talk history of Horry County.
All that.
You could probably go there because your family line probably goes, do you know how far back in Horry County?
At least 9 generations.
Wow.
And then on my dad's side, I can't get out of Horry County on Ancestry. So, yeah. My son,
it's stuck
son is 9th generation in this county, basically.
Wow,
yeah.
That's great. So we could talk Horry County, but we actually want to go and talk about the history of Israel. We did this broad brush of the history of the world, and then we jumped into the history of Israel a little bit this weekend at church, but we didn't get a chance to really go, man, who is Israel? Who are the 12 tribes? What is their history? And I know we'll talk about future here in a little bit or present day, but obviously there's a lot of conversation about Israel in our world right now.
A lot.
So can you give us some history 201 about, let's start with like the history of Israel and maybe Old Testament Israel, and just catch us up to speed.
Yeah, so I think one of the most helpful things when you talk about Israel is to, it might be good to talk about ancient history, and then we'll get to modern Israel, 1948, in the future. We'll get to that.
Okay.
And I think maybe one of the best things for people is to talk about Israel as a people group. So let's start with some terms.
Okay.
Because for some people, they watch the news, and they're like, you mean like the nation, like the geopolitical nation?
Yeah.
And let's just park that idea for a moment, and let's talk about Israel as a people group, as a people, as an ethnicity, stemming from a common ancestor. And then let's first paint a picture like, well, how much are we talking about here, history-wise? Because this is a deep history. For example, our United States next year will be the 250th anniversary of our nation.
Will it really?
Yes, if I'm doing the math right. 1776.
Yes.
So
holy cow, we're gonna have some fireworks next year.
Yeah, I'm doing some quick math, and I hope I'm right here. But okay, in perspective,
1776.
Our nation, 250 years, and people think that's a long time,
bro. It just made me feel old because I remember when we did our bicentennial.
Yes.
I'm that old.
There you go.
You might not remember that.
I do not.
I was in first grade during the bicentennial. Moving back.
There you go.
You take over again.
Perspective. So the United States has been around for 249 years, based upon the Declaration of Independence. When we said we're big boy now, we don't need a sugar daddy. We're gonna do our own thing, right? So perspective. Israel as a nation, add a 0 behind it. Just for rough numbers, let's play rough numbers, just easy math. Not everybody likes big numbers, but let's just add a 0 behind it. Here's why. So let's talk about, when do we think that Israel as a people group existed? One of the best ways, a marker, it's really, really hard to tell, but the Exodus that we see in the Old Testament, probably one of the more monumental, galvanizing moments of a nation was when Moses delivered, God delivered through Moses, that moment. The Exodus is probably our best benchmark for time. Because everything before that is a little, you got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
You got some lineage, but they might have skipped somebody.
It's a generation was here and a generation there. You got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And then we find ourselves in Egypt. Yeah. And that's really soft times. But here's what we know.
I've heard this about Egypt, and I don't know if you have a hard time there. I've heard Some people lean more to the mid-1200s for Moses and the Exodus. I've heard some the early 1400s.
Yes.
There's some debate. I don't know if you've went down that road. We are totally off the cuff here.
No, right off the cuff is, okay, I'm glad you asked that. For the first camp that thinks it's the mid-1200s, they're dating that based upon when Ramesses' temple was built, and that's a archaeological number. If you use chronology of the Old Testament, it's around 1300, 1330 is when the Exodus happened. So we could say that the Exodus event that you see in the Bible, so people like the Bible, okay, Genesis, Exodus, the second book, we could say that that is safely 1,200 years before Jesus.
Yep.
Probably 13 if you use some chronology. There's some backdating. We kind of back away into it. But nonetheless, it is a very reasonable thing to say that the people of Israel existed probably 1,400 years before Jesus.
Yeah.
Before we hit 0 AD, is that probably a good thing to say?
Yeah.
So when we talk about history, bro, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You know, inside of that history, you know, somewhere around, you know, well, they were a people group and how they were put together. You can read Exodus and then the Judges, and the people are like, we want a king. And so then, because people wanted a king, and God's like, no, you don't. And then we want a king because everyone's got a king. And so when Saul was elected as the first king of Israel, we got some really good dates starting then, because you get Saul, and then you get David and Solomon, and sometime around the 900s, as far as a nation. So, you know, when we talk about the scope of history, Israel as a people group had been a people group for, let's say it's the year 2025, so let's just say it was 2,000 years after, plus a 1,400 before. So we're talking about 3,500 years of history when we throw out words like Israel.
Yeah.
So maybe that helps people go like, okay, wow, so maybe that's why they're confused. Man, we're talking about roughly 3,500 years of history. Our nation has been around for 250. So that might help people go like, oh, that's complicated. That's a lot.
A lot. And complicated. And for the most part, has existed in that area that we would call Israel, from Jerusalem. We know there's some captivity days, and we know we know that people who have a heritage as a Jewish person, from an ethnicity, that we know that they're all over the world, obviously, but especially when we're talking ancient history, stayed primarily in that region.
So that's a menace.
When they got carried away, like, you know,
okay.
I'm doing my 66-day challenge right now. Like, I'm just finished, you know, Ezekiel. You know what I mean? I'm just getting in, you know, so I'm in the midst of all the captivity.
So you're in that. Okay. So, but you're right. So let's put them on a map. Let's call it Palestine.
Okay.
And that is actually, that's a derivative of the Philistines. That name from the, so that's an old, those read the Bible.
I show my ignorance here. I did not know that till about 3 months ago.
And
I was
you know
reading a book.
that they're called the Philistines because, well, they're the sea people.
Yeah.
They're the people from the sea, from the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So anyway, David was fighting the sea people. And so now that area, we'll call it Palestine because that might be the most relative term for today. Within a couple hundred miles. So Israel currently as a nation is the size of New Jersey.
Okay, that
It
helps.
is literally like if you took today, which the 1948 armistice line of what is Israel today, a geopolitical nation, eerily looks like New Jersey. That might help people, especially people who move here from the Northeast. They're like, oh, New Jersey, you could drive through that in a day. Absolutely. But when you read through those captivities, so the first one, obviously, the Neo-Assyrians came in and they started exporting people out of the north, the northern 10 tribes in 722. They only took them as far as Iraq. So when you read, like the story of Nineveh and Jonah, we're talking about as north to Iraq or northeast of that. And then the Babylonian captivity, obviously that's 586 BC when the temple was destroyed. They were only taken into Babylon, which a couple 100 miles.
Okay.
I mean, they're making it on foot. So it is a small footprint, long time.
Long time.
Now, that's to talk about the biblical times. Now, when you get into when the Romans came in around Jesus' time, right before, it kind of explains like what happened before Jesus showed up. Like, where did these Romans come from? The Bible, the canon of the Bible doesn't really explain it very well. But what happened is you started watching people get drifted into the Roman Empire. And so by the time the New Testament's rolled around, when we read 1 Corinthians, and he's talking to Jewish people living in, well, Greece, how did they get there? So we have this, Israel as a nation was very tight, but they would get pulled in different directions, and then they would come back in, and they would get pulled, and every time they would get into bigger, larger, like, trajectories, we call that the diaspora. And over time, the Jewish people started getting further away. So by the time we get to World War I and World War II, you have Jewish people living all over Europe.
Yeah. With the history from the ancient, that we know that, Scripture says that the people, right? That I'm not trying to go governmental lines right now. I'm trying to talk the people.
Right.
That the people are God's people, and there's promises made to them, and you have your ancient history, you have your Old Testament history, and you have your New Testament history, which leads us even into today, because with what is going on back a little over a year now, October 7th?
October the 7th.
Yeah. Like what do we need to know about Israel today? And the history, and how does the history today play into the history of the past? And even over the weekend, we talked about looking to the past so that we know how to operate in the present.
Sure, yeah, and across all of our campuses, I know here in Conway, Clay does a good job talking about not repeating the sins of the past, and we do that, I know, at all of our campuses. But I think this is maybe it's a bit of a theological, philosophical, and political question people are asking, and they don't know how to ask it. For example, like, are we supporting the same Jewish people, or is this a new state kind of thing? So, okay, well, after World War II ended September the 2nd of 1945, right? Check my math on that.
Yeah.
Was Armistice Date. So
I'll check on that.
Yeah, fact check, sure.
Chat GTP.
So after World War II in 1945, 3 years later, and I think it's in May of 1948, is when the armistice line, so, after the atrocities of World War II and the Holocaust, the United Nations says Israel deserves to go back to their homeland. Now, the word back that's the contentious word that people want to argue over. But in 1948, there was armistice line that said Israel gets the people Israel get to go back, the Jewish people synonymously get to go back to their homeland, to which the promised land, that's the same land of Canaan that was promised to Moses that he saw but didn't go into, and then Joshua, which several months ago we had the series, Joshua went into the promised land. That's the same place. But so 1948, so that's 76 years ago, that the nation of Israel has been recognized by the United Nations. So now, think of what I said when we started, and think about what I just said.
Yes, I hear it.
3,500-year history. But politically, the United Nations has only recognized Israel for 76 years under the current armistice lines. That's what people are debating about. That's what the consternation is. But if you kind of want to get a better picture, we're talking about a people group of 3,500 years that, I'm round numbers, but for 76 years, the United Nations said this is your home. And then obviously there's the West Bank and there's Gaza and that. And there's a lot in that that's going on with that currently right now. But that's what people are saying. Is this the same people? It is a people for 3,500 years, but the geopolitical lines of Israel as a nation today is 76 years ago.
Yeah, that's crazy when you think about, and for 3,500 years, they've been a people.
Yes.
But for 76 years, they've been a recognized area for people.
And when I say a people, maybe we should say a common ancestor.
Yes.
Right? And by common ancestor.
Who does that take you back to?
Yeah, it takes us back to Abraham. So
Yes.
now, obviously, Abraham, there are three world religions that attribute to Abraham, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Those are the Abrahamic religions, but we're talking about one people for 3,500 years. Now, when we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, when Paul is saying, hey, you remember the history lesson? He was taking people back 1,200 years in history.
Yeah,
he was making a 1,200-year-old reference. So think about that for just a moment. But these were people in Corinth that were living in a Romanized province on a little isthmus that was, like you said, Vegas. We say it's like Vegas. It was wild, and for a lot of reasons. But he's saying there's so much to learn from the past, and if there's anything that we should learn from the past is that we got to trust God, and you got to walk with God. Yeah. Which brings I want to make one point. A lot of people when they read the Bible, they get very frustrated with this whole history because they go like, I don't understand why they didn't record the dates and the times, and like, can it be trusted? I know in another episode we talked about creation. Can the Bible be trusted? And I would just say that when you talk about history and you talk about the Bible, we have to keep something in mind. Scholars, the German scholars use a term for the Bible, and it's called Heigistu, which means a sacred history. Okay. It's a German word. It's simply Heigistu. All right, it's a German word.
I'm going to try to use that later today.
And it means sacred history. Okay, you read the Bible, you might get frustrated. Why didn't they give me the dates and the times? And you read the Old Testament, you're like, man, it just feels loosey-goosey. When you read the Bible, modern people are looking for details. You know the first time that details show up in the Bible is by Luke. So Luke wrote the Gospel according to Luke, and the Acts of the Apostles according to Luke, right? Yeah. That's the long time. The prologue, he says, my dear Theophilus, I set about to write an orderly account.
That's right.
It's the only books in the Bible that claim that.
Yeah.
For a reason. Because every other book in the Bible has less to do with the details because they don't want to bury the headline, which is, a man walked with God. Okay, think about all the Old Testament stories. And he walked with God.
Yep, exactly.
And he walked with God. The crazy ones that Enoch walked with God and disappeared.
And was no more.
That's the point.
Yeah.
It's the pinnacle headline. So when Paul writes to the church at Corinth, they would know don't bury the headline. The whole point of history is we're supposed to walk with God.
Yeah.
Versus how did they walk with God? That wasn't the point of the story. And we get frustrated. Modern historians, like, I need to know the dates, the times. I need to know this. But the Old Testament doesn't bury the headline with the details.
Yeah.
Because when you read the historical documents of biblical history, they check out.
100%.
Archaeologically,
100%.
They check out. Chronologically, they check out. Science, they check out. And people get frustrated with the history of the Bible because why doesn't it give us the dates and the times and this? No, that's not the point of the story. The history of the Bible is a story of a people who not only walks with God, but what does Israel mean? What's the translation of the word Israel? He who wrestles with God. What happened?
Of course.
What happened to Abraham?
Yeah.
And you walk with a limp when you wrestle with God. The story of Israel is a people who have wrestled with God. And they've lost. They were people who were with God and the people who walked away from God. Yeah. They walked with God and the prophets were like, this is great. And then they walked away and the prophets were like, walk with Jesus, you walk with God. And so when Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 10, it is a admonition. You can walk with Moses and not walk with Jesus.
Yes.
That's what he's saying.
Yes, exactly.
And what do we need to learn from the history of Israel? Don't sweat the details. Walk with God.
Yeah. I think that's so good. And I think a perfect way for us just to wrap this up. And And you brought it up. Walking with God is a wrestling with God. Not in a negative wrestling, but in a just like there's tension. I'm trying to figure out how to best walk with him. And you can go ancient Israel, and you could see that even into our present day. And I hope that's good for not just you and for me, but for everybody, that we would all recognize that we can learn from history. We can be prepared in the present so that we can best be prepared to walk with God. Yeah. So, all right, guys, that's about it for today. Thanks for joining in on this History 201, and we hope you have a great day. We'll see you later. Perfect. Thank you, sir. My phone rang 3 times. I'm like, who is trying? What? Perfect. We said 20 minutes.